Hey there! Welcome to another episode of Raw Green, a show produced by Obi, a sustainability consultancy specialized in life cycle assessment, research, and green techs. Learn more about us on oneobi.com or take a look at our pages on various social medias. Links are ready for you in the description. Ciiiao! I am Francesco De Lieto. I am passionate about sustainability and green technologies. Welcome back to a new episode of Raw Green. So here's the story. A few days ago, I came across an article about the rising number of cyber attacks targeting renewable energy power plants. It was eye-opening, not just because of the increasing frequency of these attacks, but the sheer vulnerability of the systems. Hackers could breach plants through multiple entry points, where there are inverters, data loggers, monitoring systems, even apps in the cloud infrastructure. At the flick of a switch, they could potentially bring down entire grids, sending part of the world back centuries in terms of energy access. One expert featured in the article was Uri Sadot, cybersecurity program director at SolarEdge Technologies. His insights stood out, and I knew this was a conversation worth diving deeper into. So I reached out to Uri shortly after reading the article to learn more about the evolving threat landscape, and of course, to invite him to join us on Raw Green. And so, here we are. Uri, welcome to Raw Green, and thank you for being here. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to be able to talk about this important subject.
Well, very happy to have you here. And why don't we start by you telling us a little bit about yourself, your story, and also your role at SolarEdge Technologies.
Sure. I'll say a few words about SolarEdge for whoever doesn't know it, but it's a company that produces solar inverters, rooftop, ground mount. So this means solar installations on a typical home, on a typical business. And I've been with the company for a few years after having worked in various fields. I've done a few years of consulting with McKinsey, and I've done a few years of kind of more hands-on cybersecurity. And after we did a risk assessment in the team I was in the company, we identified this issue of cyber as let's say, an underserved issue in the market generally. And the reason is that there's been such a rush in the past decade, maybe two, if you're generous, to deploy these new technologies, these inverters, these even wind farms, that cybersecurity has kind of been ignored and sidelined. And you have today systems that are widely installed throughout Europe, throughout the United States, throughout other geographies in the world that have the same cybersecurity level of a consumer device, you know, your Roomba cleaner, your baby monitor. But when you add them all up together, they have the power of multiple nuclear plants.
We started light. Okay, so so when you joined the SolarEdge, there wasn't a, let's say, a pressing need of dig deeper into cyber security and cyber attacks threats, and you brought that onto the table, right? So what is your job? Is to develop programs around cybersecurity to increase the level of technology and defense against attack. If you can please go a little bit more granular onto that.
Yeah. I mean, so not quite. I mean, SolarEdge, I don't want to talk too much about the company, so it's not, too focused on one. And at this point, I think I have a good view of the industry and where it's at. But I have to say a few words about SolarEdge. SolarEdge has always been kind of a premium offering. So it has invested in cyber pretty early on in the design of the architecture of the products and in many security features. And it stood out. And one of the things I saw was that it's a strong advantage that is not spoken enough about in the industry. But let me kind of go away from, any individual vendor and kind of maybe describe the issue. The issue is that, if you take one house and you have a solar system on it with 10 kilowatts, that's not a big temptation for any cyber attacker. That's not a big risk for anyone except for that homeowner. But when you take 1,000, 10,000, a million of those, and today in Europe, there's over 4 million homes. In the US, I think also over 3.5, 4 million solar systems. And what's important to understand is that many of those inverters are controlled from central locations. So if you're a vendor, you would sell these devices. You have a factory, you send these boxes out, they're installed. But there's all these smart features that a homeowner wants to have. So if you install a solar system, you want to control it from your phone. You want to know if one of the panels is not working. You want to know if there's a malfunction, or just to see how much money you spend today, how much CO2 emissions you prevented.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the most popular features for any solar system. But what that allows is a constant internet connection between central servers and all these millions of systems. So when you start thinking about, okay, what could go wrong? Well, human errors, right? If you have a type of bad software update, like we just saw with CrowdStrike, right? We had airports shutting down because of the cybersecurity company that sent a bad update. So what if that happens? And there have been cases with some vendors where faulty software updates were sent in systems in Germany specifically, where you had to send truck rolls to go fix it. So those things have happened, and then you have more nefarious scenarios of bad players, bad actors trying to use these systems to gain access of enough power on national grids that can cause big issues. It's very hard to hack into a nuclear plant today or a big power station. Those are heavily regulated. There's very mature markets of cybersecurity solutions of how to protect those. Typically, these are big installations that have teams. These are multi-million euro projects. There's people responsible for these issues. But this new technological change of distributed energy resources that are on a consumer level, so EV chargers, smart heat pumps, solar inverters, devices that are internet connected, are at your house. They're private property. Nobody has authority. It's your private property. But when you tie them up together, they become as powerful as a nuclear or more. So there, I would say there's a lack of maturity in regulation, in regulatory understanding, in the offerings of cybersecurity companies. It's just an area that's, I don't know if a red ocean's the right analogy, but it's
Well,
it's a problem brewing.
It is a problem brewing, and I mean, thanks to the article I read, and then to the chats that you and I had previously, I'm learning, and I mean, I used to develop solar utility power plants, but again, it was over a decade ago, and the threat of cybersecurity and what could be done, not just at the utility scale, but because of the sheer size. So you say hackers are not interested into the small household because of that risk reward payoff at the end, right? But if you put 1,000 together, okay, it may sound like an appealing target to have that. You briefly mentioned about markets and geographies. You did an example about the US, and your work takes to you to study and to act onto different latitudes and geographies. Can you please give me an overview of what you saw in different markets in terms of both regulations, security level, mitigation strategies? Let's say, for example, between the European Union and the US, let's put this two.
Yeah. Sure. So, I mean, we've been in touch with, I'd say even we've had good professional close relationships with folks at the federal level in both the Europe and the US. In the US, everything federal it's mostly the Department of Energy, although the White House had an office dealing with these issues for a few years. And in the EU, a lot is happening in Brussels, but there's also a lot happening on individual member states. I'd say the primary distinction between these two geographies that we're seeing, the approach we're seeing in Europe is very top down. So, it could take a few more years, but there's these top down regulations that are going to come. Just like we had GDPR, we're going to have the Cyber Resilience Act, we're going to have the NIS2 implementation and rollout, and then we're going to have the Network Code on Cybersecurity. And those are the platforms on which a lot of the discussions are taking place of how to mitigate this issue. And I'm happy to say that over the last year, there's been a very sharp rise in awareness of this issue. A lot of this was kind of driven, I would say, by Solar Power Europe, the trade association that we're part of, and most European, players in the solar industry are. And they published a policy paper, and they launched a webinar that's available on YouTube talking about these issues, and then began a roadshow to all the relevant agencies and EU Commission agencies, and I think some of the parliamentary members. And that has really kind of catalyzed and driven action and movement that I believe will likely turn into actual regulation in the coming, 2, 3, 5 years. But over time, I am optimistic that these issues would get some kind of response. Whether it would be enough, whether it would be too late, is another issue. We have seen individual member states that have been more concerned than others about these issues. Well, the UK is not a member state, but they've taken some interesting actions. And Central European countries too have actually passed some laws that come to kind of mitigate this risk. In the US, it's a very different environment. They don't like to enforce things on markets. They like things that are market driven. So they have, for example, federally funded project to define what a secure inverter, for example, looks like, and set a standard by a certification body, and then to try and encourage that through adoption of large buyers, the Googles, the Facebooks, states, government procurement. So they have a different approach at things. But I think the tying factor that you see in both geographies are that there's high or growing awareness to this issue, in a sense that this is not a sustainable path forward.
Well, though, but it is mind blowing, this thing, Uri, that EU, it is EU that they love regulations, and and it is fine. I mean, here we're talking about security, national, regional, continental, whatever. Because seriously, it is something that if implemented could create some serious damages. I mean, we're talking about maybe not having access to our internet, but think about if you're in a hospital and you need energy to run everything that you need to run into a hospital. Okay, while what it is even more mind blowing, it is that in the US, which, I mean, for what I read, general press, they are obsessed with national security, and then they leave something like this open to what? Self-regulation of what? I mean, seriously, it is something that I couldn't think. It's a nonsense for the literature that I know about the US and the obsession that they have with national security, not to have something strict and regulated onto that. Especially for what you said onto microgrids. I mean, we have conversations about distributed generation and microgrids going on for such a long time, and the importance that they have into decarbonization of energy and consumptions. So something like this could jeopardize everything, could literally jeopardize everything. And we're not talking about a unidirectional consumption. We're talking about small plant distributed energy that feeds into the grid. We're even talking about cars to grid. So this is something that really needs to be took over. What would you suggest them to do as a first step to be a little bit more strict?
So first, I mean, tackling the point you started with, right, that this can be a catastrophic blackout. I want to, tell the listeners, this is not exaggeration. This is not hyperbole. Like the grid is a very delicate, huge, human creation that always needs to be balanced. and there always needs to be as much generation as there is demand, and there's some flexibility, and there's various mechanisms to create to introduce that flexibility into the grid, but it's expensive to add these buffers and these flexibility solutions. So traditionally, the grid has been designed with a certain threshold, which is about sometimes the figure 3 gigawatts or 10% of a distribution grid. And there's various kind of matrix that you can rely on. And it's also important to understand that the European grid is all interconnected. There's all like mutual reliance between countries at this point.
Yeah.
So what would happen if there's a major disturbance, in a single moment, is a cascade where the imbalance, triggers, and then you have all these emergency shutdowns of larger plants that could take days to turn on. So that's like a simple scenario of sudden change because, I don't know, inverters have been all reset at once, or EV chargers have all been like sent an order to discharge or charge at once, or home batteries. That's a simple scenario. But there's more nefarious scenarios where inverters are bricked, they're fused, so they're sent bad firmware, so they can never be repaired again. And then you have gigawatts, tens, dozens, soon hundreds of gigawatts of heat pumps, of inverters, of batteries that cannot generate any. So you have this inherent deficiency. And there's other scenarios of that are more clever, of shutting down, then shutting on, and turning on, and burning transformers. And you could probably design an attack that would cripple a grid for prolonged periods of time. If you look at history, the first major cyber attack that I can cite on a power grid was Russia against Ukraine in 2015 or 14 on Christmas Eve. And this was very kind of nefariously targeted, 24th of December evening, very cold, hundreds of thousands of people denied of electricity for a few days. Okay, so that's on the gravity of this risk. And I think the second question you said was how did the Americans let this happen? How would they not regulate against this? I've heard many answers in my conversations with American counterparts. Some of them said climate is more urgent than cyber. We need to deploy whatever we have to mitigate carbon emissions. That's one thing I heard. The second is, it's a free market economy. If anyone strikes, we'll strike back, which is, deterrence. Third is we're a mess, an X show. So we can't regulate all these things. It's a free economy. It's not constitutional. It's the nature of things. So you get all these answers, but at the end of the day, you have this new technology that produces cheap electricity that people want to buy, and people put on their roofs and connect to the grid, and regulation is slow to adapt, especially in this kind of slow world of utilities and local utilities. And the American system is very, very fragmented, right? So you have these local utility commissions. Yeah. So to create regulations across the board for this bottom-up technology that people are just kind of, getting local permits to connect, it's hard. And before you know it, you wake up and it's like the travels of Gulliver, right? He falls asleep and these little Lilliputians tie ropes around him, and before you know it, there's too many of these small devices that are installed and are insecure, and you have dozens of gigawatts of insecure solar on the grid. So that's on the problem side. Not to sound too alarming, there's mitigations and solutions that are underway and can be thought of and designed, but I don't know. Tell me where you want to go with this.
Uri, no, but okay, but we're talking about components that are part of the overall grid, so from production to transmission and distribution. So in a particular historical moment where there is this, I call it in a very romantic way, love and hate relationship between the US and China, for example. And we're talking about, again, national security. They're talking about banning TikTok. Okay, but they're not talking about let's say easy access that let's say a hacker could have, or cyber attackers could have through inverters or other components. Part of the production plant. So again, in my logic, I cannot understand why this thing it is not tackled from a regulatory perspective, from a production, manufacturing perspective, which is a very serious issue. Going onto the manufacturing and let's say the parts of a power plant. For all power plants, whether it is utility scale or whether it is residential, okay, small home or small commercial, sorry. If you can please describe which parts are the most vulnerable ones. We talk about inverters, but there are other components that could be attacked and why they could be attacked.
Sure. So I think that's a very easy answer. It's almost always the inverter. The inverter's the brain. It's got the communication channels. It's got the Wi-Fi card, the SIM card, the LAN cable. It manages the system because it has the computational power, and it communicates with the internet, which is the doorway to all evil. If you look at panels, they're very inert. Panels, there's not much you can do with them. They have a junction box, but it's like very basic electronics. You can't really mess with those. If you look at other parts of the system, a battery. So a battery, theoretically, when you have 10 kilowatt hours of energy packed in chemistry, if you play with it, that could create, if you unleash that energy in the wrong way, that could create fires and problems. But the physical safety standards for batteries are actually very mature. So even if you have full access to a battery and you're a bad guy and you're trying to change the BMS, the battery management system, it's very hard to create a thermal overflow or a thermal runaway reaction that would actually start a fire because there is suppression. So that's number one. It's just hard to cause issues there. And number two is that the battery is just completely governed by the inverter. Typically, in a typical installation. And the context I'm talking about is, residential, small commercial. If you look at the other context of a large solar field, which is, the area you have you have more expertise than me, and you probably know more about these issues than I. If you have a large solar field and you have battery packs and inverters in it, those are typically disconnected from the internet by some kind of secure gateway. There's typical IT architectures in place for those fields that provide some kind of protection, at least for the larger sites. This goes outside of my kind of full expertise, but so I'd rather not talk about it. For the smaller systems, it's almost always the inverter. If you want to look at EV chargers or smart thermostats, if they're coupled to an inverter, they might be controlled by it, but an EV charger is also its own entity. So it could have its own connection to the internet in many, many instances. And that could make it do bad things, start charging from a million cars, discharging energy from a million cars once we have V2G. So you could have grid disruptions come from there as well. And usually the market distribution is that you have in areas not a lot of players. So you would have, 5, 6, 8 EV charger vendors, and they have a server somewhere. And if the wrong hands get their access to that server, that could end badly.
Well, basically anything that has a internet connection, it is something that could open up the breach to perpetrators.
Theoretically, from a technical point of view, you don't have to have internet. You can have NFC, or you can have physical access or Wi-Fi. If you're creative, you can access the system in many ways. But in reality, there isn't. It's like in the crime stories. You need an alibi and a capability. So there's not a motive for people to go door to door and start implanting agents on these devices. But if you're a hacker in North Korea that gets paid to do this, and you can get into a server that allows you control over many such systems, you can hold for ransom, or you can do bad things to the grid.
This was one of my questions. Yes. What are the motivations behind? Because it could be more, it's not just about money. Or it could be like I don't know. There are some countries that they are apparently pretty active They have
Yeah.
their own hackers army and others, which I don't know if you want to dig deeper into that.
I read a crazy statistic a while ago that the number one export of North Korea in terms of foreign currency is cybercrime. It's ransomware. I think, I don't know, the number of millions of euros. Yeah. So they go
Really?
and
Uh,
they hospitals ransom like the worst types of targets in exchange for ransom that they get in Bitcoin, and then they can trade that for goods. They can buy, I don't know, things into their country. So it's a source of income for them for national revenue, and it's state mandated. That's an extreme example, but I'd say typically you have the state sponsored attackers and you have criminally motivated attackers. In a simplified way, the criminal ones, most attacks are criminally motivated, but the worst ones and the most sophisticated ones are usually state sponsored. So that's kind of the breakdown.
yeah, do you know, actually, I know you know because we briefly discussed about it. If you can please break down a little bit more about the Bolt Typhoon accident or
Yeah.
attack that happened between a Chinese, let's say, team of hackers, whether they were state-backed or not, uh, targeting the U.S. grid.
The United States, they've been talking about infiltration into critical systems. There's so many quotes, from the FBI, from the White House, and others about critical systems being, you know, agents prepositioning themselves. I think was one word used, and in Europe as well. Like there's many articles I've read recently um, about rising numbers of attacks and about the growing concern. And I think even in renewables, I think the German energy minister a little while ago said that this is becoming a priority because they're just seeing so many attempts and so many attempts at that. So yeah, somehow energy has always been coupled with cyber. Like from the earliest days of cyber, the big incidents were somewhere always around
Related to.
energy. And yeah,
Uh, can you let's do a case study, if we can call it this way. Can you please tell me a kind of attack? Let's work on to, let's say, microgrids. Okay, what could be a kind of attack? How it is done, and more importantly, what are the let's say the mitigation and correction actions that can be done once that microgrid has been attacked? If you can go a little bit more technical onto this.
so when I think about a microgrid, we can define it in several ways. I usually think about like a disconnected off grid area, but let's go for a scenario where a microgrid is let's say a building. It has a solar roof. Then it has a lot of loads. I don't know if it's a retail business, so it has refrigeration rooms and lights and all these things. It has an
Hmm.
energy management system and EV chargers. So let's say this is a little microgrid, and the inverter's internet or the energy management system that controls the inverters is controlled from somewhere in the world through the internet. Um, so I can give a few real world examples. In Lithuania,
Please.
so yeah, Central Europe, September this year, the national, it wasn't Litgrid, but one of the national utilities, basically, I'll remember the name in a moment. They reported that they experienced a cyber attack against not one such microgrid, but they said multiple, so many such. They said hospitals were in it, and just to kind of set the stage, these are sites that have this national utility provide maintenance services remotely. And that remote monitoring, remote services function was hacked into. So basically, what hackers could do was access those systems and do with them what they want. It wasn't written if this was somehow used for ransom or if they were kicked out before they could do anything. But I'm pretty sure some damage was done. I'll have to reread the report. So if I have to kind of give the attack route, this is a bad actor who identifies not a single home, not a single microgrid, but a monitoring service, in this case operated by a Lithuanian utility, but this also could have been operated by a third-party maintenance server, by a VPP player, or by a manufacturer like SolarEdge or many others. And if their servers were, compromised, then those could be used to do all these things. But to go, to drastically simplify this, it's somebody getting full control of your solar system. So, they can turn it off. They can, discharge electricity in ways that would cripple the grid. And there's some more exotic scenarios of, trying to steal your energy through crypto miners or, things that would turn it into cryptocurrencies. There's more exotic things. But that's a typical kind of attack route.
I've also read, if you can please confirm this, that they could also somehow access your bank account. Or I remember reading an article. I went full paranoia on this. So I remember reading an article about the hackers that they were getting into a system as a diversion to be able to access the bank accounts and bank information of that particular targets. So basically, by disrupting their energy systems around, they were able to creating that diversion, they were able to access the bank accounts. Again, paranoia at 1,000 level of altitude. But I don't know if it is something that you heard of.
Give you a scenario. How about this?
Okay.
How about this?
Okay, let's not sleep tonight. Thank you.
In 2014, one of the most iconic cyber attacks of this type happened against the American retailer Target. So they specifically had an agreement. Target had an agreement with an HVAC, like air conditioning provider, that also had remote monitoring. So, they had this service that every site manager at Target could see temperature, energy consumptions, air filters through the HVAC monitoring service. So this system was compromised. It was somehow breached. But what the hackers were actually looking for was not, air quality in Target stores. They wanted a foot in the Target network. And the moment they got that, they started moving laterally. And once they got into the financial department and the cache of credit cards of customers, they stole, tens of millions of those and sold those in the dark net. Yeah. So that's something that can happen. I think, again, this is not, we're not in retail, but regulations have become much more strict on how you can save and keep credit card numbers of customers. And you have to give customers the ability to delete them, etc. But those types of things can happen. Like once an attacker gets into a network, there's a variety of things they can do. They can start sending very convincing looking emails within the company network, asking, for example, for a PO, a purchase order. And instead of the bank account of the customer, they can change the digits so it's their bank account. You see these things all the time. Like attackers are very creative. And in this context of those types of attacks against businesses, the solar system can just be an entryway. So if it's insecure, it could be the doorway into the network. We've seen a lot of these. Yeah. It's an unlocked door. It could be a printer. It could be any IoT device. But what we have with solar inverters today or EV chargers, again, it's because of that rush to deploy that we've just seen a very low, unregulated level of IoT security requirements. So you have a lot of these poorly protected devices out there that could be backdoors.
And in my very deep and knowledgeable expertise on tech issues, my solution in these circumstances would have been pull the plug. What happens actually in reality? How can you counterattack that? How can you defend yourself? Once you realize, okay, I have been hacked, my system has been hacked, my inverter has been hacked. What do you do after?
So look, I think we all have this kind of gut reaction to say, okay, we don't need this technology, please stop. But in reality, we all use mobile phones, even though we've seen so many cases of spyware, and we all use computers and not pen and pencil because the progress and what it allows is just more than the cost, although the cost and the risk are significant and not to be downplayed. So I think I'm of the opinion you can't go back. Like you can't, yes, if you have a solar system, you can unplug it from any connectivity. You would not know how much production has happened unless you go to the actual, kind of wall
Meter.
and
Yeah.
see the
Yeah.
numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, but most people prefer to have it on their phone, even if there's some risk involved. So I think that's just the kind of reality we live in. We're moving forward, and AI is scary, but it's cool and interesting, and we want to adopt it. And in reality, you can't really go back. Some places do, banks, military bases, they'll air gap. They'll have like, okay, this area, but they have their own challenges. People that want to work from home and things like that. So the benefits of connectivity and of technology are great. I think your second question was what we can do if not
Yeah.
to fully unplug with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here, the good news in my view is that it's completely doable. Like you don't need to invent a new field of physics to secure these systems. It's all solutions that have existed and have been deployed. And I gave the example of phones. Billions of phones out in the world, and the cat and mouse game of attackers and defenders for the last 20 years have brought phones and laptops to a security level that is very significant. So let me give you this example. If you talk about solar systems, there's millions of these systems in Europe or in the US. And there's three things that need to happen in order for us to have a perfect, secure system. And I want you to keep the analogy of online banks in mind. Okay, so if you have
Okay.
an online banking app, most of us do, you have your phone with you. On it, you have an app that you trust. You have a password or something or a fingerprint, and you go in and you see your life savings, and you can move them around and send money to people. So almost the most sensitive things we have, we do through our phone in a secure way that we trust the encryption of, we trust the validation they do behind the scenes, etc. So that's number one. You need to have a secure endpoint. You need the app to be secure at the edge. The second thing you need to trust is the bank servers. So you need to make sure that the bank that is managing all these communications with these millions of apps and phones is secure. You want to make sure that nobody can get into those servers from a back door and do what they want and take the money and do a big bank heist. And the third piece of this chain is that you need this whole system, this technological system of server and endpoints to be managed by someone or something that you trust. So you want this to typically be a company with financial stability that is controlled and managed by someone, an entity that you trust. You don't want this to be managed by the mafia or by somebody who can disappear tomorrow. So you need to have endpoint, server, and control by an entity that you trust. Once you have those three, you can freely use your mobile banking app and not worry about, losing your life savings. Now I go back to solar systems, distributed solar systems. You have this edge device on your wall, which is the inverter, the brain of the system. Then you have a server that controls millions of these on the continent. And then you have an entity that manages all these things. Because it's such a new industry, 10, 15, 20 years, most companies, you're not where you are with banks, but I think that should clearly be the direction. We need to say, okay, like banks are important, money's important, energy is important too. Energy is the blood of society. This is the bottom rung of the Maslow pyramid. Communication, transportation, all these things come on top of energy. If energy is taken away, society stops. And for that, you need to make sure that we have grid grade, critical infrastructure grade, call it what you will, requirements for these new technologies. And we've had that for decades. We all trust the protections around a nuclear plant or around a big gas power plant, that exist in every European country. And we need to require no different from renewable energy, from the future energy infrastructure, which we're going to. By 2050, majority of energy in the continent will be solar, wind, hydrogen, batteries. We want to make
Yeah,
sure that those are built with the same foundational security.
that you have with the banking
Um,
industry.
in,
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we're talking about security here. Uh,
it's
e- e-
technology
even
that exists. So
yeah, it's that is reassuring that we have what we need to have a level of security enough to sleep at night. That it is reassuring. You briefly mentioned two little letters before that. I want to know what you think if it is friend or foe, and I'm talking about AI. Is it
mm,
something that, in your opinion, can be a friend or a foe or both? Obviously, it depends who is using it and for what
yeah.
purposes.
Um, it's a good question. Today, I mean, it's such a powerful technology that you have to think of how it affects everything. Um, I'd say both. I think on the one hand, as we move forward towards a grid that is more digital, it's more internet connected. It's made up of all these different digitally communicating components. Um, you are going to have a much smarter grid. And a smarter grid is a more efficient grid. It's cheaper energy. It's less polluting because you can you can use your existing infrastructure better, right? So if a specific neighborhood, a specific distribution area can do trading of energy internally and manage supply and demand internally, for example, through a dynamic pricing system or something of that sort, then you have a more efficient system. And AI will inevitably get into that um, at some point. And there's another approach, just saying, AI is going to power a lot of the development of these technologies. So, for example, I've read that for battery cell efficiency, you need to do a lot of experimentation. So AI is going to kind of power that up. If I had to think about a bad or a faux aspect, I have a friend who works in a cybersecurity company. Whenever they hire new employees, they give them this test, and they said they have this new procedure now that before they give out a test, they try it on all the latest AI models to see if they can solve it. And they always made it harder so the
Hmm.
models can't solve. And over time, they just can't create
Any
tasks
harder?
that are hard
Hmm.
enough for the models
Hmm.
not to solve. So if that's the case, we could see ourselves with all these vulnerable devices where they say you don't have to be a lawyer to be an expert because you have GPT. So you don't have to be a hacker to get into all these systems. So I don't think we're there yet, but that's definitely concerning kind of thought.
It is definitely food for thoughts. I am incredibly pessimistic about AI. I recognize its value. I am,
Yeah.
I am, I am, I am the kind of guy that is saying right now, pull the plug like immediately. Uh,
Really?
because it is such a powerful instrument in the hands of human beings, and inevitably there will be a episode like it happened with the atomic bomb that will
Yeah.
basically make the entirety of the people realizing what are we playing with right now. But I also understand the good that it can be done, like nuclear energy. You briefly mentioned about batteries before. It can definitely be a major source of knowledge in material science and a number of other application that could help to bring up level of efficiency, well-being, wealth, whatever. But let's say doom and gloom approach, I am saying pull the plug right now,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. I think that
immediately.
it goes back to a deeper discussion about human nature, right? Are we
It does.
fundamentally,
It really
yeah,
does.
good or
It really
evil?
does. And again, not to be here. I don't want to spread any negativity, but Chat GPT and little brothers and sisters that are available right now on the market, it is exactly what it is available right now on the market. God knows what it is behind the stage, what they're preparing behind the stage right now that we don't know about it, or that cannot be disclosed, or a number of other reasons. But again, let's not add to the paranoia.
I mean, I'm with you, right? It's moving so fast. 6 months ago, it couldn't do half the things it can do now. And now they're adding video and all these things that are out there. They just can't let everyone have it because it takes so much energy. And what is that going to mean just for energy demand? And what is that going to mean for the environment? What is that going to mean for all these tools that anyone who wants to create a computer virus or a human virus?
Uri, employment. Governments around the world, politicians around the world, they still have to finish to understand how Facebook works. And now they have to cope with something that it is on another level of magnitude, different levels of magnitude. So how they're going to legislate, how they're going to regulate onto something that they don't understand. And again, it is something that it doesn't make me. I know, for example, my job has as a clock. I know I have a few years of time before my job as a consultant will be no mas. There wouldn't be any more consultants. I'm fully aware of that because some of the things can be already done much better through artificial intelligence. Some not, because thank God our job, it is lots of research based, and that it is something that you still have to scrutinize quite a lot what any AI is going to come out with an answer. So it's not, you still have that reliability issues. But as it is for consultants, happens to, I don't know how many other professions around the world, as accountants, lawyers. You mentioned lawyers before. Yeah.
I heard the big we're going to endless numbers of jobs and are investing a ton in AI. I agree. I mean, I think I have this like instinctive reaction where I've always been a technology enthusiast since I've been a kid. And it feels like it's finally happening. We've been promised all these things as kids, like think about Star Trek and all these like crazy technologies. And all of a sudden you have these humanoid robots and you have these machines that talk and you have great advancements in medicine and
the fake videos. They are absolutely incredible. Yeah. They really are incredible. Yeah. Well,
in a way, it's not just futuristic. It's as if it's things we've prepared for. We knew it would come, and it's finally here. So I cannot not be excited, but I share the concern, and the genie can't be rolled back, right? If you do it, another country would run forward. So I guess
through.
we just great.
Yeah, they will definitely follow through. Well, I can tell you this: one thing cannot be replaced by AI. It is this conversation that we had, you and I, today. It was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge about a very, very serious topic that both countries and companies, and also, let's say, final users, whether at a residential or a utility scale, they need to consider much more thoroughly.
No, thank you. I mean, I think it's a very important topic. Clearly, I've decided to kind of invest myself fully in it. But I do want to finish with a positive spin because,
please.
I mean, I think there's I think there's cause for some concern, right? Like we've been flooding the markets with these insecure devices. I stand behind that. That needs to be fixed. We say that to everybody willing to listen. There is a pathway of how to fix this. And I think the optimistic part is not just that it can be fixed, but that when I think of a future grid that's not 5 years away, but it's 10, 20, 30 years away, it's not only cleaner, it's smarter, it's more efficient, and it's more secure and resilient. Because once you have these, you know that metaphor of a starfish, you cut off one arm and it continues to live because every part of it is independent. So today we live in these grids that have one big power plant and then these distribution areas.
Yeah.
There may be other interconnections, but ultimately, like it's pretty vulnerable. And the moment you have, even on a house level, right? You have panels, you have a battery, you have an EV charger, in a car that can store battery for a week or two, or a fuel cell and hydrogen. So every house is independent. Every house can trade energy according to what it produces, what it needs, every neighborhood, every country. So theoretically, and we're seeing the early steps of this, you can create through these technologies grids that are just better on every parameter. And when you have a grid that's more efficient, it's cheaper. So, when nuclear energy was found, they spoke about energy too cheap to meter. We may not be there, but a person with a solar system and these panels and systems are getting cheaper every year. We can find ourselves in an era where you have much, much cheaper energy. You have energy independence for homes, for communities. So I do think we have a positive outlook, but we just need to not be naive, not do the same mistakes we did with the internet, where we rushed to deploy and we created this new global infrastructure that's fundamentally insecure. I think we need to take those lessons and make sure that we stop responsibly and make sure that there's a mitigation plan for how we build this bottom up in a secure by design and a safe way. And it's doable. It's just prevention is better than a cure. It's better if we do it early. So that would be my parting shot to the
I'm with
audience.
you. I'm with you 100% because if we still want to stick with the banking/business metaphor and comparison, the very first thing that they teach in business school, it is diversification. To not put all your eggs in one basket. And your concept of modularity, it is even better when applied to diversification, because you can scale up gradually your technology, your grid, your transmission, your distribution, your production, whatever, generation, whatever. So it is a good way to end the episode. Thank you very much, Uri. This was a pleasure.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Raw Green. To get this far, you must have liked it. So don't forget to hit that like button and follow our podcast. It is a great way to support our community. At OBI, we're all about research, life cycle assessment, and green tech innovation. Stay connected with us through our social media pages or visit our website. Links are below in the description. See you next time. Ciiiao.